You're listening to Apple FM. Find out more at applefm.co.uk.
There we are. Welcome back to the Mirror Show with me, Ian Uren. There was a snippet there from Steve Hackett's first Genesis Revisited album. And in the first part of the interview that I did with him, which you're about to hear, he was talking about the Mark II Mellotron, which you can hear on that very track. Interestingly, coupled with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. But enough of me. Let's hear what Steve Hackett, in his own words, had to say. Here he is.
Yeah, the idea really came from a visit to Sicily. I arrived playing acoustic guitar, and I came away with the idea of rebirthing the Genesis dream. For me, I think Italy was important in the fact that some of those songs I really think are Italian in spirit. I'm thinking of Fountain of Salmacis and Watch of the Skies. It seemed as if the Italian spirit and the Genesis one, we just seemed to share a common language, a spiritual language perhaps. And I remember Watch of the Skies sounding absolutely wonderful when we were rehearsing it. Before we wrote play it live, we rehearsed it in one or two palace sports. And of course the Mellotron sounded wonderful, ringing off the walls, shaking the foundations, all of that, you know. And when I re-recorded it, I wanted to create that sound. So I just used the reverb send. I didn't use any direct signal when we redid that. Plus I added an orchestra, the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra.
Yes, of course.
So,
give it extra welly.
Funny that, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, you'd think that an orchestra would have the same power as a mellotron, but the funny thing is we tried it with just the orchestra first of all, and it didn't really work without the mellotron. You needed both, I thought. Yeah, nice to be able to do some moments that were, you know, purely mellotron and organ, mellotron brass, and have a real brass section, a great brass section playing it and turning those things into fanfares.
Yes, absolutely. Particularly with these live strings and the mellotron, there's that depth of sound, isn't there? You've got to really get that bottom end. I would imagine take the mellotron away, it becomes a little bit sort of toppy, middly, that type of thing.
So it's a strange thing, yes. There's a kind of, there's a sound that goes with mellotron brass for the train spotters here, you know. It's a really growly, engine-like sounding thing, especially if you start sending it through Leslie cabinets, and you can make it a little bit like an organ, but somehow there's that kind of for a mechanical beast, it really does sound mechanical, but it's a huge sound. It's got a kind of aggression to it, you know, part distortion, part the fact that each one of those notes is comprised out of a large brass section in the first place. So, it's one of the mainstays of rock, I think.
Yes, definitely. And it's so emotive of that period as well, isn't it? You know, I don't think even sort of synths themselves can't quite recreate that analog sound that the mellotron has. You know, it's very warm.
It is. It's a kind of cold warmth that the mellotron possesses. Now, I was with Stephen Wilson the other night, and he's just about to buy a mellotron.
Oh, right.
And of course he's got all the modern devices at his fingertips, but he wants to buy a mellotron because they do something that really nothing else does.
No.
And so, you know, I wish him luck with that. You know, we often have mellotron conversations. He says to me, Steve, half-speed brass, that's what it's all about. And he'll start quoting King Crimson moments, and I'll be saying to him, I used half-speed strings on the beginning of Please Don't Touch on this new record, and I said, I know what you mean. Yeah, half-time mellotron, interesting.
Mellotron,
half-speed.
But it's because they're such beasts, aren't they? You know, and
the real thing. Yeah, the original. Well, the Mark II took 4 men to lift.
Good grief.
A pallbearer on each corner, and yes, grown men
struggling away there.
Struggled under the weight, under the lash. Yes.
So Tony Banks was there, pointing his finger, directing everybody.
Well, you know,
putting it in the right position.
But, you know, I was the person who I was the great sort of Mellotron groupie, really.
Right.
And I wanted the band to get one. I knew that we just had to have a Mellotron.
Yeah.
There were certain things I had to have in early life. I had to have a Les Paul. I had to have either a Marshall stack or a high-watt one. And I had to have a Mellotron. I had to have a light show.
Yeah.
I had to have all of those things. And then, of course, we had to have a synthesizer.
Yeah.
And then we had to have a hit record.
Yeah. That was the next step, the progression.
You need the tools, first of all. Someone's got to front you the money.
So, that's right. So not too demanding then, Steve, really?
No, I would have done anything. I would have
Yeah.
become a rent boy, but I was too busy doing, music.
Exactly. Well, it sort of leads me on to another question. With the first Genesis Revisited, that's Mike Rutherford's song, Your Own Special Way.
Yeah.
You sort of changed it. It really became like a soul record as far as,
It did. That really divides people, that one. My wife hates it.
Oh,
actually.
Really?
Yes, because she liked the original. And there were many fans who were incensed at what they called the Lionel Richieization of it. But, but from a record that never really got a play on radio, suddenly Radio 2 were playing it.
Yes.
In pretty heavy rotation. It seemed to crop up on Wogan's show a lot at the time. And I thought,
Yeah. It
I
really
must have done something right.
It certainly hit the mark, because I remember personally when I heard that, when it cranks into your guitar solo,
Yeah.
it's so distinctive, and I thought, hang on a minute, who's redone this? And then
Yeah.
lo and behold, it was your good self. And
Well, it was a radically different take on it. I mean, I just straightened it up into a love song,
Yeah.
for which many Genesis fans never forgive me, and I sort of tended to knock on the head the seafaring aspect of it. I felt that I made it much more boy-girl,
Yeah.
whereas the original had a kind of romanticism that was, romance of place. And
Yeah. It's quite dreamy, isn't it? And
yes, it is, and I think both versions have got something to offer. And if you haven't heard the original, I think that Paul Carrington sang a wonderful version of it, and
yes, he certainly did. There was a fantastic voice on that.
yeah, it was a very slick production on that one. I think.
Yeah.
The stuff of Magic Radio and so yeah, it's not often I do a ballad like that, but we did have real strings. We did have, again, the Royal Philharmonic on it, and so it's not just the
Sort of a treated
box of
sound.
tricks. Yeah.
And it really comes across that. I actually quite like the arrangement of it, leaving out the middle eight with the keyboard bit and going straight in and
Much
keeping
as I
it
was
short.
fond of that bit, I thought in a way I would pare it down into something that could perhaps be an unashamed hit.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. So then we come to Genesis Revisited 2 now, your latest album, which reached number 24 in the album
It
chart.
did, yes.
Yeah.
I'm thrilled to have that. To have an album in the charts is always a joy.
Yeah, absolutely, and an absolute feast of musicians and singers on there. How long did it take you to actually get it together?
Well, it was from January this year to halfway through August. We were quite pushed because it's a double album. It's almost 150 minutes, and it's the longest album I've ever heard by anybody. So the vinyl version is actually four vinyl albums, 8 sides of vinyl. So it gives you some idea of the length of it.
Yeah. It's a bit of a volume there, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It is, yeah. Volume is the right word.
But so really, it's quite a short span to record something. I mean, it's obviously, was it quite intense, the recording of it? Sort of in there every day, laying them down one after the other type of thing.
Yes, it was flat out for a long time there. For the best part of 6 months, and or do I mean 8? But it was. Yeah, it was an extraordinary time. The last 2 months were the most difficult, and we seemed to be way off finishing the schedule. We were still waiting for vocal parts to arrive from people, and recording 2 drummers at the same time, and string players, and the record company was saying it's absolutely critical that we have this out by October, and in order to do that, we have to have the sleeve ready by the end of July, and I said to them, look, I'm not going to make the end of July, it's not going to happen, but how about, if we're a week or two into August? They said, yeah, that's fine, we can cope with that. So they must have had some contingency in mind there.
Sort of a backup plan.
Yes, but we were all going a bit green, myself, my wife, Joe, and Roger King. Roger was looking extremely green. I was worried he was going to, he was aging horribly.
Sort of keeling over with the pressure.
Keeling over, aging horribly. He now is rejuvenated and looks like his young sex god self. At the point, I thought he was not long for the wood crop.
Oh, good grief! Yeah, that's not good. But you got there. You got there at the end. Well, one of the songs from that really shines personally is the return of the giant hogweed. First and foremost, the guitar solo at the end, I think, is extremely interesting, but also the singing, particularly on that track, it's sort of captured that Gabriel playfulness.
Yes, I think that's a good way of describing it. I think that Neil Morse did a wonderful version. He'd recorded his version with Transatlantic, and I was really impressed with that. That the pace of their recording of it was slightly faster than the original, so I thought, oh yes, if I revisited this, I played it live with them, Transatlantic. I'd sat in with the band and did that as their encore for High Voltage Festival, and it went down so well. People just loved it from the word go, and they as a band played it with such relish. So I thought, yes, that old beast deserves to come out of the closet.
Yeah, because it's somewhat maybe overlooked in some respects. I know a lot of people say about musical box, because we're talking, nursery crime here, aren't we?
Yeah.
And A Fountain of Salmachus, but perhaps Return of the Giant Hogweed was one that tended to get forgotten about, maybe.
Well, it's easy when you're doing lots of tracks that are all epic length. At the time when I joined the band, they were, or we were producing, 3 tracks aside at that point. Sometimes 2 tracks aside. So yes, it's very easy to lose Hogweed on that first album, Nursery Crime. Very, very long tracks.
Yes.
Of course, when you're doing stuff like Foxtrot and Supper's Ready, which you can't really miss. Yeah. And that became a firm favourite of friends. But this is as you say, it's playful. It's a humoresque. It's as obscurantist as you could possibly be. A lesser known species of wild growing plant. It's not the stuff of romance as we know it.
Well, no, it's sort of a terribly English humour, shall we put it?
It is. Yes. It's a bit of a jaunt, really, isn't it?
It is.
It's a bit of a jolly jape.
Yeah, I do like it. I like it a lot. And I'm interested to see that Simon Collins is singing Phil Collins' son on the album. Is that right?
Yes, he is. And I worked with Simon on an album of his a couple of years back called Fast Forward the Future, and I was very impressed with that. Loved the sound of his singing and drumming on it. And it was wonderfully produced by Dave Kurtzner, who's also on the album, who'd acted as a kind of liaison between Simon and Francis Dunnery, who's also involved with the album, but not in a guitar sense, but as a singer on Dancing with the Moonlit Night. So there seemed to be a whole pool of musicians who were in touch and working together on the other side of the pond, but always with the English connection.
Yeah, absolutely, and it really makes the hairs on your neck stand up, because you listen to Simon's voice and it echoes his dad. I mean, it's there, isn't it? And
yes, he has got a similar sound. It's I think perhaps a tad sweeter than his dad, but he does have a lovely voice, and you should hear him singing his own stuff if you haven't. I thoroughly recommend it. Anyway, Fast Forward the Future. I played a brief solo on one of the tracks there.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Well, I'll definitely dig that out. I had a little look on YouTube and had a little sort of insight to some of his stuff and was mightily impressed, I have to say. It was great. The other singer that shone for me was Amanda Lehman, of course.
Right.
Absolutely loved her singing, particularly on perhaps Shadow of the Hierophant.
Yep.
Yeah, that really was really good.
Well, you know, she has a very interesting voice, quite chameleon-like.
Yeah.
She does a number of voices, and at times she's part Stevie Nicks, part Marianne Faithfull, both young and old. And she'd never really sung in what she described as a classical style with Shadow. But originally, it was Mike Oldfield's sister Sally on Acolyte all those years ago doing Shadow. And I said to Amanda, well, I really wasn't after a classical style. It just so happened at the time that Sally had been taking vocal lessons, and so she was sounding a tad more operatic. But when she first appeared on the scene with an album called The Sally Angie with her brother Mike, she was the one who went out and got the record deal and got them signed to Transatlantic straight away. And I remember loving the sound of that and her voice. And I said to Amanda, look, it would be better, you know, not to worry about sounding classical. And she said, oh, well, that's a relief.
Yeah.
We changed the key for her. We lowered it by a tone.
Right.
As you sometimes have to do when you work with other singers.
Yeah. That suits them, comfortable for them, so that they can portray the song without straining and all that sort of thing.
Indeed.
Yeah, which I have to say, you know, is a fantastic version of that, as is Ripples, because that's the other side of her spectrum, sort of the lower end of her scale. Yeah,
Ripples. You know, it's always tricky when a girl's singing a guy's song. You know, you're breaking into an exclusive boys' club, and so that seems to have divided the fans. You know, half of them absolutely love it and love the kind of the world-weary verse and the kind of celebratory chorus where she becomes young again. I think it's a beautiful rendition. It reminds me slightly, again, of talking about Marianne, her sound on the ballad of Lucy Jordan. It's got that sort of
quality to it,
where she's singing down the octave, and it's quite raspy and very salty, and it's almost as if she's got both aspects there. So I think, although Amanda's not going to be joining us for the live shows promoting the album, she will show up on some shows as a special guest because she has a family commitment, you know, young son. She doesn't want to, you know, walk away from the family and a life on the ocean wave as we're going to be doing.
Yeah, it's a big commitment, isn't it?
It is a big commitment, but I've said that, you know, there's a place for her in the band when I go back to doing shows of my own material.
Right. It's actually quite an extensive tour you're doing this time, isn't it?
Well, it is, and dates are being added all the time.
Yeah.
Suddenly there's Japan, and suddenly there's Scandinavia, and Mexico, and
wow. So it's really
Los Angeles, and a trip on the Caribbean with other bands, and all sorts of stuff going on.
You're going to be a tired man at the end of it, that's for sure.
Yes, I mean, I feel tired just having attended
thinking about
the Rock Awards last night. You know, the classic Rock Awards.
Yes.
Where I got to present award to Family. You know, the band Family.
Yes.
Really thrilled to do that. So I was a guest presenter.
Oh, fantastic!
And it was nice to be able to big them up with a little speech.
Yeah, so it gives something back, doesn't it? And that's
yes. I mean, I thought they were a great band, and I saw them in the late '60s, and you know, they were one of the favourite bands.
Oh, fantastic! What a privilege! Yeah, that's a lovely thing to do. What I was going to ask you was to wrap up the Genesis Revisited thing. Is how do the other original members like Tony Banks, Phil Collins, Mike Rutherford, how do they sort of view it? For you doing this? Or?
I think what tends to happen is that the band are always notoriously tight-lipped about each other's efforts, you know, publicly. Personally, I've been less guarded about that, you know, but I think there was a policy in the band at one point that remember this coming up in conversation when we all were novices at doing interviews, and one or two people were saying, I think we should start mentioning other bands less. You know, other people less. So I think that's sort of, you know, it's been part of almost like the house rule. You don't comment on other people, and you also don't comment on, you know, each other's stuff.
Yeah.
But
understood protocol type of thing.
Yeah, unwritten, you know, protocol. But personally, I've always, if I've liked anything that any of them have done, frankly, I've always said so, you know, personally to them. I've been the first to phone them up and congratulate them, and I don't mind talking about it, you know, publicly, because I've always thought that the band was full of high achievers, to put it that way, at the very least. And
I mean, it's a huge amount of talent there, but between all five of you, and relationships of any sort of nature in that environment are quite can be quite touchy, with so much energy going on, and the creative value by everybody. It's quite a thing, isn't it? When you, because you're all writing, you know, and the only time where it became separated was Peter in one room writing the lyrics to Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, and musicians
the band writing the music in the other, which that was a bit of a tricky divide. Obviously, he was very into the story and felt that was at least as important as the music, and I don't think he felt really like mucking in the same way that he would have perhaps done at one time. So, yes, the band was dividing into separate camps, but I think he was being true to his muse as we were. So, you know, he's held in great affection.
Oh, absolutely.
By the band, but it's always been a very competitive band, and so yes, you want the other guy to do well, of course.
Yeah, and it's the moments to shine, that type of thing, and it's getting your writing sort of together, because there's almost like a committee, or seemed to be like a committee between you, that it had to be a majority decision before.
Yes, it's not quite as bad as Noel Coward, you know. Every time someone had a success, every time a friend of mine does well, you know, a little part of me dies. It's not.
Oh no!
It's not that bad, you know.
No.
I'm just happy that we've all had success, and that we've all had the public's ear for quite some time, you know.
Absolutely.
Over the decades.
Yeah, there's longevity, and it just shows quality of music always will shine through, and it's good that, from my point of view, personally, that Genesis Revisited 2 is getting the music back out there for younger listeners, you know, to be introduced maybe that wouldn't have heard it before.
I like to think that, you know, that is the case. I've certainly been proud to revisit those songs with a huge team, plus the occasional orchestra and the fabulous amount of singers. But you know, I think it's because the strength of ideas often outweighed perhaps, you know, the early execution of the ideas.
Yes, because there's also that sort of satisfying the different sides of Mr. Hackett, isn't there, really? The classical side, and you were going into blues, the blues album, which I particularly love, with the harmonica playing, as we mentioned before. You know, so really the only thing that you haven't really covered so much, as far as I'm aware, is jazz. Is that something in the offing?
Well, I have done a fair amount of jazz with Jarbe, the Hungarian fusion outfit. They're, you know, part world music, part jazz. I mean, they are a lot of things. So I have done shows where there's not a note of music written, and we see what comes out. I've done that with Evelyn Glennie.
Right.
And if that isn't jazz, I don't know what is. You know,
exactly.
Believe me, you know, we went on the London stage doing that at the Queen Elizabeth Hall some years ago.
Wow.
Not a note written, and
just playing by your shirt tails.
Yeah, we're absolutely flying by the seat of our pants. It's the first time I had to really tear up a script, and I thought, are people going to wear this, or are they going to throw rotten vegetables? We seem to retain their interest. Either that, or they're a very polite crowd up at the South Bank.
Yeah, that's always interesting, and it's good as a musician yourself to be pushed and try different areas, and keeps you ticking over, doesn't it? Yeah, absolutely great to talk to you.
Yeah, all the best.
And to you.
And
Take
to your
care.
team. Okay.
You
All the
will
best.
do, and we'll see you next year on tour.
Thank you.
Thank
Lovely.
you.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Bye.
You're listening to Apple FM. Find out more at applefm.co.uk.